The world went dark before I could even scream. One moment I was standing in my kitchen, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee warming the morning, and the next, I crumpled to the floor as if my legs had betrayed me. Pain shot through my chest like lightning, and then nothing. When I woke, I was in a hospital bed, the white ceiling blurring into the harsh glare of fluorescent lights. Machines beeped steadily, and somewhere beyond the thin curtain, doctors whispered urgently. A voice, calm but firm, spoke my name. "They're trying to reach your daughter," the nurse said, glancing at the phone on the counter. "It's important." I wanted to lift my head to call her name, to beg her to come. But my strength was gone. I closed my eyes and whispered a silent prayer that she would be there, that she would drop everything and run to my side. A pause. The nurse frowned at the phone, then frowned harder as she listened. "She says she's busy," the nurse said, her voice caught between disbelief and anger. "She said it's her husband's birthday. She can't come." I blinked, confused. Did I hear that right? Busy, her husband's birthday. My heart twisted painfully. I tried to speak, to say something, anything, but the words caught in my throat. She knows this could be your last night," the nurse continued, her voice trembling now. I don't understand." I could feel tears sliding down my face, hot and sharp against my cheek. The world narrowed to that one moment, the sound of her indifference ringing louder than any beeping machine. How could she, after everything? After the nights I stayed awake when she was sick, after the birthdays I wrapped in my own fatigue just to make her smile, after every sacrifice I had made quietly, hoping she would one day understand what love looked like, and now, in my hour of need, she chose a party over me. I wanted to scream, to rail against fate, against her, against the cruel injustice of being betrayed by my own flesh and blood. But all I could do was lie there. Every heart beat a dull drum of betrayal. The doctors worked around me, but I felt like a ghost in my own body, watching the world move without me. Each visitor, each nurse who came to check my vitals, became a reminder of what I had lost, not life, not entirely, but the trust, the warmth, the love I once had from my daughter. When I finally drifted back to sleep, it wasn't peaceful. Dreams of her laughter, of bedtime stories, of school events I never missed, twisted into nightmares. I saw her walking away from me, her eyes cold, her words sharp. "I'm busy," she said again. "It's my husband's birthday." Time blurred. Nurses came and went. I overheard murmurs about complications, about my fragile condition, about how close I had come to leaving this world. And all I could do was think about her absence. The betrayal so raw, it ached deeper than any wound the doctors could mend. In that sterile hospital room, a seed began to grow, quiet, slow, but relentless. It was a seed of resolve, watered by the tears I could not shed, nurtured by the sharp sting of betrayal. If life had abandoned me, at least I would not abandon myself. Even in my weakness, even in my pain, a thought crystallized. The world could be cruel, and people could be heartless, but I would survive. And when I did, there would be reckoning, not out of hatred, but out of necessity, because some debts could not go unpaid, and some betrayals could not be ignored. And so, as the night stretched long and the machines whispered, I closed my eyes once more, not in surrender, but in the quiet, simmering promise that I would endure. I would rise again, and she, my daughter, would see the strength she had forsaken. The hospital room smelled faintly of antiseptic and flowers left by strangers. I awoke to sunlight slicing through the blinds, warming my face, yet it brought no comfort, only clarity. The ache in my chest was a constant reminder of how close I had come to the edge, and how coldly my daughter had turned away. For the first time, I allowed myself to truly see the situation. The truth was bitter, sharper than the tubes that had fed me, sharper than the pills that had kept me alive. She hadn't called again, she hadn't even sent a message, and the nurses, kind as they were, could not replace the warmth I had once taken for granted. I sat up slowly, each movement a careful negotiation with my own frailty. The past 2 weeks had been a haze, a blur of machines, needles, and whispered warnings. Yet now something within me stirred a faint but insistent ember. The despair, though heavy, began to transform into resolve. I thought of every night I had stayed awake when she cried, every meal I had skipped to save money for her, every holiday I had worked late just to make her feel special. And I realized that my life, my time, my dignity, they were not hers to dismiss. 2 weeks had passed since I had been abandoned, yet those 14 days had done something profound. They had awakened in me a sense of agency I hadn't known I possessed. I was still alive, still breathing, still capable of action. And if she would not be there for me, I would no longer depend on her. I spent hours reflecting, staring at the sterile walls, letting memories wash over me. I thought of the small betrayals she had committed over the years, the times she had borrowed money and forgotten to repay it, the subtle manipulations, the dismissive words, and I realized that this hospital incident was simply the culmination of a pattern. But anger alone would not serve me. It could burn and consume, leaving only ashes. No, I needed something subtler, something decisive, something that would remind her, without cruelty, of what she had forsaken. The nurses began to notice the change. Where before I had been weak and dependent, I now moved with careful purpose. I asked questions, demanded explanations, and even managed to smile at the small victories, pouring my own tea, holding a book upright without assistance, taking a few steps in the hallway. Each movement was a declaration, I am still here, I am still whole. One afternoon, while sitting by the window, I overheard a young nurse discussing a financial checkup I had requested for my accounts. Something clicked. I didn't need to scream, didn't need to plead. I had the tools, the means, the independence to ensure that my life, my future, would be mine to control. And control, I realized, was the sweetest form of revenge. Not revenge born of malice, but revenge born of survival. I would not let her neglect dictate my end. I would rise, I would thrive, and when the time was right, she would see the cost of her indifference. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat, I made a decision. I would leave the hospital stronger, more careful, and more deliberate than ever before. I would reclaim what she had taken not physically, but emotionally, financially, and morally. Some might call it vindictive. I called it necessary, and as sleep finally claimed me, I dreamed not of her absence, but of the life I would build in the aftermath. A life where I could walk with dignity, where my worth was no longer measured by her presence or approval, and where betrayal had no more power over me. Home felt foreign when I first walked through the door. The air smelled faintly of dust and old wood, and the familiar creak of the floorboards under my feet sounded almost like a stranger. It should have been comforting, but instead it reminded me of everything I had endured alone. The hospital, the pain, the absence of my daughter when I needed her most. I set down my bag slowly, deliberately, as if staking my claim on the life that had been nearly stolen from me. For 2 weeks I had been a prisoner of uncertainty, dependent on strangers' schedules, the rhythm of beeping machines, and the mercy of those who weren't family. Now every object, every corner of this house became a statement. I am here, I am alive, and I am no longer powerless. The first call I made was to the bank. My voice was calm, precise, a sharp contrast to the weakness I had felt in the hospital bed. I changed passwords, activated alerts, ensured that my finances were secure. Every transaction, every access point, was now under my control. I didn't feel triumph yet. It was too quiet for that, but a subtle satisfaction grew, the kind that comes not from cruelty, but from reclaiming something that had almost been taken from you. After the calls, I sat by the window, watching the sun tilt slowly toward evening. Memories bubbled to the surface, her laughter when she was small, The first time she rode a bicycle without training wheels. The nights I read to her until she fell asleep. My chest tightened, but it was no longer only pain. There was clarity now, a hard-edged clarity that made me stronger. I began preparing my home for the next steps, not in anger, but in strategy. Bills were organized, keys and documents secured, small tasks completed with meticulous care. Each action was a statement. My life would continue with or without her acknowledgement, and every advantage I had once given her freely would now be under my discretion. The house was quiet, almost too quiet, and yet I felt an anticipation I hadn't known in years. It wasn't fear, but a keen awareness that the storm I had long imagined was approaching. And I would meet it, not with fury, but with calm, deliberate action. I thought of the phone, now sitting silently on the table. I imagined her panic when she finally realized what had changed, how little she could control my life now, how swiftly her absence had become her disadvantage. A small smile touched my lips. The thought of her confronting consequences, of realizing that life had moved on without her, was not malicious. It was poetic justice, the natural outcome of her neglect. Even as I organized, planned, and waited, I allowed myself moments of reflection. I wrote down memories I didn't want to forget, letters I would never send, and lists of everything I had given her over the years. Each note reinforced the truth. I had done my duty, loved fully, and sacrificed willingly. Her betrayal did not erase my love. It only illuminated the strength I had nurtured quietly all these years. Hours passed, the sky darkened, and with it, the sense of anticipation grew heavier. I felt the subtle shift in the air, as if the world knew a reckoning was coming. And then, as if on cue, the phone rang. It wasn't my bank. It wasn't a routine alert. It was her, my daughter, finally breaking through the calm I had cultivated, finally confronting the consequences of her choices. I answered slowly, letting the silence stretch just long enough to unsettle her. Her voice trembled, barely contained panic, and though I had long imagined this moment, it struck harder than I expected. I don't understand what's happening. Why can't I access your accounts? Why didn't you tell me? I let her ramble, her words tumbling out, frantic and guilty. And all the while I remained calm, deliberate, measured. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to demand. She would understand in her own way, and soon enough. Because by the time she arrived, frantic and breathless at my door, she would see what I had already built. A life reclaimed, a strength undeniable, a dignity untouchable. The storm was coming, and this time I would meet it not as a victim, but as the architect of my own justice. The knock on the door was frantic, sharp, uneven, desperate. I didn't rush to answer it. I finished my tea first, letting the warmth settle in my chest. Outside, I could hear her shifting her weight, pacing, tapping her foot the way she used to when she was nervous as a child. Some habits never changed. When I finally opened the door, she stood there breathless, eyes wide, phone clutched in her hand like a lifeline. "Mom, Dad," she stumbled over the word, panic leaking through every syllable. "What's going on? I can't access the accounts. The bank said you made changes. Why didn't you tell me? Are you okay? You should have called me." I looked at her calmly, really looked at her. She was dressed well, hair neat, worry painted carefully across her face, but it wasn't worry for me. It was fear for what she might lose. "I did call you," I said quietly. The words landed harder than any shout ever could. She froze. "In the hospital." I continued, my voice steady. "The doctors called you too. They told you it might be my last night." Her mouth opened, then closed. I was busy. It was my husband's birthday. You know how important." I raised my hand gently, stopping her. "Not in anger, in finality. It's all right," I said. "You made a choice. I simply accepted it." She followed me inside. eyes darting around the house as if something might have changed while she wasn't looking. Everything was exactly the same, and yet nothing was. I was unconscious. I said, sitting down. I woke up alone, no messages, no visits, not even a text. Tears welled in her eyes now, real this time. I didn't think it was that serious. They told you it was. I replied softly. Silence stretched between us, heavy and uncomfortable. I realized something in that hospital bed. I continued. I spent my whole life putting you first, not because I expected anything back, but because love does that. But love doesn't mean erasing yourself, and it doesn't mean accepting neglect. She knelt in front of me. Please, I'm sorry. I panicked when I couldn't access the money. I thought something happened to you. I nodded slowly. Something did. Her breath caught. I survived. I said, but I woke up. I explained then, not with bitterness, but with clarity. I had secured my finances, updated my will, removed shared access, made arrangements for my care that didn't depend on someone who might be busy when it mattered most. I'm not punishing you, I said. I'm protecting myself. She cried openly now. You're cutting me off. No, I corrected gently. I'm standing on my own. That was the revenge, not shouted, not cruel, not dramatic. It was dignity, independence, consequences delivered with calm hands and a steady heart. She stayed for a while, apologizing, promising change. I listened. I didn't argue. I didn't comfort her the way I once would have. When she finally left, the house felt lighter. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. I hadn't lost my child, but I had reclaimed myself. And in the quiet that followed betrayal, I discovered the sweetest revenge of all, living well without begging to be loved.